The next morning, the sun rose over the horizon, casting a soft golden light on the rocky landscape. Jackson and Serafina had spent the night in the cave, their minds working through the choices that lay ahead. There was no more running. Whatever challenges were coming their way, they would face them together. Serafina had changed. The person who had arrived on this desolate planet, full of guilt and fear, was no longer the same person. Her past had shaped her, but it didn't define her anymore. With Jackson by her side, she could see that a future filled with freedom and possibility wasn't just a dream. It was something they could build together. Jackson stood up, stretching his arms above his head as he looked out over the valley. The peaceful morning light contrasted sharply with the danger that still lingered in the air. But there was a sense of calm within him, a certainty that they would be able to handle whatever came next. Serafina stepped up beside him, her gaze steady as she looked out at the world they were now ready to face. The fear that had gripped her heart for so long was still there, but it was fading, replaced by something stronger: determination, hope, and trust in Jackson. She didn't say anything at first, but the way she stood beside him, her shoulders squared, her chin lifted, spoke volumes. Jackson glanced at her, seeing the fire in her eyes. "You ready?" he asked, his voice calm but with a hint of excitement. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew they could take it on together. Serafina turned to him, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. "More than ready," she replied. They packed up their camp quickly, moving with purpose. The road ahead was still uncertain, but they no longer felt the need to hide. They weren't just running from their pasts. They were running toward something better, something they could create. As they made their way toward the distant mountains, Jackson could see the change in Serafina. The confidence she carried with every step was new, and it was the result of her deciding to leave the chains of her past behind. She wasn't just a warrior anymore. She was a person with the power to shape her future. Serafina caught Jackson watching her and gave him a quick, reassuring smile. "I never thought I could be this free," she said, her voice full of wonder. "I never thought I could be something more than a soldier." Jackson smiled back, his heart swelling with pride. "You are more. You always have been." They walked in silence for a few moments, the weight of everything that had happened between them hanging in the air. But it wasn't a heavy weight. It was the weight of shared experiences, of growth, and of a bond that had deepened more than either of them had expected. As the mountains grew closer, so did their sense of hope. The future was still uncertain, but now it didn't feel so terrifying. Together, they would face whatever came next. Together, they could be anything. Jackson looked at Serafina one last time before they entered the next chapter of their journey. He didn't know what awaited them, but he knew one thing for sure. They were stronger now, not because they had defeated every obstacle, but because they had learned to walk through the world together, side by side. And that, he realized, was the beginning of something far more beautiful than he had ever imagined. Jack stood in the grand hall of Velfar's palace, feeling the weight of Elira's piercing gaze on him. His heart raced as he processed the tension that hung in the air. The princess had just turned her back on him, her anger clear in every movement. Her guards, tall and imposing, were still watching him closely, ready to strike if she gave the word. Jack was trapped. He had to find a way out of this situation before things escalated. He took a deep breath and stepped forward cautiously. "Princess Elira," he began, his voice steady. "I understand I've made a grave mistake. I did not mean to offend you or your people. I only came here to offer an alliance. Please, let me explain." Elira remained silent for a moment, her back still turned. The room was eerily quiet, except for the low hum of the palace's energy systems. Jack could feel the weight of the moment, the pressure of the failure starting to settle in his chest. The mission was slipping through his fingers, and if he couldn't turn things around, humanity's chance at securing an alliance with the Veltherans would be over before it even started. Finally, Elira spoke, her voice colder than before. "Do you not understand, human? You have dishonored me. My people. This is not a simple misunderstanding. You have broken one of the most sacred customs of our kind. She turned to face him, her silver skin shimmering under the palace lights. To remove the exosuit is to be at one with yourself, to be vulnerable in front of those you trust. And you, a stranger, barged in without permission. Jack's mind raced. He knew very little about Veltheran culture, but now it was clear just how important their exosuit was. It wasn't just armor, it was an extension of their identity. The princess had been caught in a private moment, a moment she shared only with those closest to her. Jack hadn't just walked in on her. He had trampled over a cultural boundary he hadn't understood. He had made her feel unsafe, exposed. "I'm sorry, princess," Jack said, his tone softer now. "I had no idea. I didn't know how important this was. I can't take back my actions, but I want to make it right. I'm not here to disrespect you or your people." Elira's sharp eyes narrowed. "And why should I believe you? You're just like all the others. You come here to my world, thinking you can simply take what you need. You think your technology can buy us. But you are wrong." Her voice was filled with disdain. But there was something else in her eyes, something Jack hadn't noticed before. A flicker of uncertainty. A need for something more. Jack knew he couldn't back down now. He had to prove he was different, that he wasn't like the others who had come before him, trying to manipulate the Veltherans for their own gain. He stepped forward again, this time with more confidence. "I'm not here to take anything," Jack said firmly. "I'm here to offer a partnership, a chance for both of our people to grow stronger together. We face a common enemy, and we need each other to survive. You don't have to trust me right away, but I'm asking for a chance. A chance to prove that humanity is more than just another opportunistic species." Elira paused, her eyes studying him closely. For a long moment, the room was silent. Then, finally, she spoke. Perhaps you are not like the others," she said quietly. "But you have much to prove. If you truly want to earn our trust, you will have to face the trials of honor. Only then will we see if you are worthy of an alliance." Jack nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and dread. The trials of honor were a brutal series of tests designed to measure strength, intelligence, and honor. It was the Veltheran way. He had no choice but to accept. "I'm ready," Jack said, determined. "I'll prove myself to you and your people." Elira gave him one last look, her eyes unreadable. "We will see." Jack stood in the middle of a vast training arena, the hot sun beating down on him. Elira, standing off to the side with a few of her advisors, watched him closely, her arms crossed over her chest. Around him, the Veltheran warriors were preparing for the trials of honor. He had heard about these tests, a series of brutal challenges designed to test one's strength, intelligence, and character. And now Jack had no choice but to face them head-on if he wanted to prove himself worthy of the Veltherans' trust. The first challenge would test his physical endurance. A booming voice echoed across the arena, announcing the start of the trial. Jack looked around and saw that he was surrounded by an obstacle course, filled with walls to climb, pits to jump over, and thick ropes to scale. The course was designed to challenge even the most skilled warriors of Velfar. His heart raced. He had faced difficult situations before, but this was different. This was for everything. His mission, the alliance with the Veltherans, and his honor. "Begin," the voice commanded. Without hesitation, Jack sprinted forward, pushing himself to his limits. He jumped over the first pit, using every ounce of strength to clear the gap. His feet barely touched the ground before he was scaling the first wall, his fingers gripping the rough surface as he pulled himself up. Sweat poured down his face as he reached the top. But he didn't stop. He had a goal now, to prove that he was more than just a human diplomat. He was a warrior in his own right. The next part of the course was a series of thick ropes suspended high above the ground. Jack swallowed hard as he looked up at the swinging ropes. He had no choice but to climb them, but the height made his stomach turn. He grabbed the first rope, his muscles burning as he hoisted himself up. His legs dangled, and for a moment he wondered if he could make it. But there was no turning back now. The ropes swayed dangerously as he moved, but Jack focused on the task. He pulled himself higher, his body aching, but he refused to quit. Each pull of the rope felt like an eternity, but he kept climbing, pushing through the pain. When he finally reached the last rope, he could see the finish line just ahead. With one final burst of energy, he swung from the last rope, landing with a heavy thud on the ground below. The arena fell silent for a moment. Jack stood there, panting, his body covered in sweat and dirt. He had completed the first challenge, but it had taken everything he had. He looked over at Alira, hoping for some sign of approval. Her face remained unreadable, but Jack could tell that she was impressed. The warriors around him nodded, recognizing his determination. "Well done, human," one of them said with a grunt, though his tone was still skeptical. Jack couldn't help but smile, even though he was exhausted. He had passed the first trial, but there was still more to come. He couldn't relax yet. The next challenge would be even more difficult, and he knew that Alira was watching closely. He had to prove that humanity was more than just a race of diplomats and strategists. Alira stepped forward then, her voice calm but firm. "The next trial is one of intellect. You will need to solve a series of complex puzzles, puzzles that have baffled our best minds for centuries." Jack nodded, steeling himself for the next test. His body was sore, but his mind was sharp. He could do this. The Veltherans might be stronger, faster, and more advanced in some ways, but humanity had something they didn't: resourcefulness. He would use that to his advantage. Alira's eyes locked onto his, and for the first time, Jack saw a flicker of something else: respect. He was getting closer. The alliance wasn't out of reach, but the path ahead would be difficult. Jack's heart was still racing from the intense physical challenge he had just completed. He had barely caught his breath when the next trial began. A mental one, the kind he wasn't sure he could prepare for. But as the next test was explained to him, he realized something else, something far more dangerous than the trials. Alira led him into a large chamber, the walls covered with ancient symbols. The room smelled faintly of incense, and the air felt thick, as though something important was about to happen. Several Veltheran scholars were gathered around a large stone table, and in front of them sat a series of puzzles. They weren't just ordinary puzzles, Jack realized. They were riddles and codes that had confounded Veltheran minds for centuries. Solving them was said to require the sharpest intellect. As he began to examine the first puzzle, a strange feeling crept over him. He noticed the Veltheran scholars whispering to each other, their glances fleeting but filled with something Jack couldn't quite place. Alira was standing off to the side, watching him, but there was no expression on her face. It was almost as if she were watching him from a distance, detached. Jack pushed the thought aside. He had a job to do. But as he leaned in closer to examine the codes, a flash of movement caught his eye. One of the scholars, an older Veltheran male, was sneaking around the back of the room, his hands moving nervously. Jack didn't know what was going on, but something felt off. As he began working through the first set of puzzles, he realized he wasn't alone. A soft clicking sound echoed from somewhere in the shadows. His instincts kicked in. He had been trained to detect danger, to notice things that others might miss. The clicking grew louder, and Jack's eyes darted around the room. It wasn't coming from the scholars. It was coming from the walls themselves. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the shadows seemed to deepen. In that moment, Jack understood. This wasn't just a test of intelligence. This was a trap. The scholar who had been moving earlier made a sudden gesture. His hand brushed against a hidden panel in the wall, and before Jack could react, the floor beneath him gave way. He stumbled, caught off guard as the ground split open, and a trapdoor opened beneath his feet. He fell, his body tumbling into a dark pit below. Before he could get his bearings, a series of harsh voices shouted from above. and Jack realized he was not alone in the pit. The light from above cast long shadows, revealing the figures of masked soldiers, armed with weapons that hummed with deadly energy. They had been waiting for him. "That was too easy," one of the soldiers said in a low, mocking voice. "A human thinking he could be our tests." "Foolish." Jack quickly scrambled to his feet, his heart racing. The soldiers had to be part of the conspiracy, a group working against the Alliance. The real test was not the puzzles. It was whether he could survive the trap they had set. As the soldiers moved toward him, Jack's mind raced. He didn't have time to think through a strategy. He had to act. His training kicked in. He darted toward one of the walls, using his momentum to slam his shoulder against it, knocking down a few loose stones. He grabbed a large chunk and held it like a makeshift shield. The soldiers hesitated for a moment, surprised by his quick reaction. Jack didn't waste the opportunity. He lunged at the nearest soldier, knocking him off balance and disarming him. The fight was chaotic, but Jack was faster and more resourceful than they expected. He grabbed another weapon, quickly assessing how it worked. In the midst of the struggle, a familiar voice echoed from above. Elira's voice, calm and unwavering, called down to him. "Stop. Let him go." The soldiers froze, confusion flashing in their eyes. Elira's form appeared above the pit, her sharp gaze locking onto Jack. The soldiers stood down, but Jack could tell something wasn't right. This was all too easy. He wasn't meant to just fight his way out. This was all part of a bigger plan, one he hadn't fully understood yet. Elira's expression softened, but her eyes still held a calculating edge. "I see you're capable of defending yourself, human. But this was only the beginning. There are those who don't want you to succeed here." Jack's chest tightened. He had been right. Someone, or something, was working against him. And now he was more than just a diplomat. He was caught in a deadly political game, and the stakes were higher than ever. Jack's chest still heaved from the fight as he was hauled out of the pit. His hands were raw, and his muscles ached from the struggle. But the truth of the situation weighed on him heavier than any physical pain. Elira stood above him, her face unreadable, but her eyes held something more. Uncertainty, perhaps even sympathy. "You fight well, human," Elira said coolly, her voice betraying no emotion. "But you're not here to fight. You're here to earn trust." Jack wiped the dirt from his face, his eyes narrowing as he studied the princess. "So this was another test. You set me up to see how I'd react to being trapped." Elira's eyes flickered for a moment, but she didn't respond right away. The tension in the air was thick, and the soldiers who had been ready to strike now stood at attention behind her. Jack wasn't sure if the attack had been part of the trials or if there were deeper forces at play, but the trap had been real enough. "I'm not here to play games. If you want me to trust you, you need to be honest with me." Elira's gaze shifted to the soldiers, and with a sharp motion, she dismissed them. They filed out of the chamber in silence, leaving Jack alone with her. "What's going on, Elira?" Jack asked, his voice firm but quiet, almost demanding an answer. He could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on him, and he needed the truth. The princess sighed, her posture relaxed for the first time. "There are factions within Velfar that do not want an alliance with humanity," she said, her voice lowering. "They believe you're a threat, that bringing your species into our fold will cause more harm than good." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. He had known that not everyone on Velfar would welcome an alliance, but he hadn't expected this level of hostility. "So, that's what this was, a test to see if I could survive their attempts to kill me." Elira looked away, her expression softening for the briefest moment. "Not entirely. This is a game of power, Jack. Many of my people want peace, but there are those who thrive on conflict. They see the enemy beyond our borders, but they believe that aligning with you will only bring more enemies." Jack's mind raced. If these factions within Velfar were so set on opposing an alliance, Then the princess was in a far more dangerous position than he had first realized. She was walking a tightrope, trying to maintain peace while fending off internal rebellion. "I'm not your enemy," Jack said, his voice calm but resolute. "I came here to help, to offer a future for both of our people." Halira's eyes flickered with something. Hope, maybe. She turned toward the large stone table, where the puzzle challenges had been earlier. "There is another test, one that goes beyond your survival instincts. You must prove that humanity is worthy of trust, and to do that, you must show your loyalty to me, beyond words." Jack took a step closer, his curiosity piqued. "What do you need from me?" Her gaze hardened. "You need to find a way to expose the leaders of the faction that opposes me. They have been working in the shadows, pulling strings to undermine our alliance. They are the true enemies, and only by eliminating their influence can we move forward." Jack's mind spun as he processed her words. This wasn't just about surviving the trials. It was about playing the dangerous game of Veltheran politics. He needed to expose these enemies, find out who they were, and defeat them, without making enemies of the people who wanted peace. It felt like too much. But Jack had come this far, and he knew there was no turning back. He was in deeper than he had ever planned to be, but he would have to push through. If he wanted humanity's future, if he wanted this alliance, he'd have to risk everything. "I'll do whatever it takes," Jack said finally, determination hardening in his voice. Halira gave him a long, searching look. "I hope you're ready, human. This game isn't one you can easily win." She turned and walked toward the exit, her movements graceful but filled with purpose. "The next steps will be dangerous. Choose your allies carefully." Jack walked through the palace's darkened corridors, his mind racing. Halira's words echoed in his mind. "Choose your allies carefully." She hadn't explained much, but the message was clear. He was about to enter a world of intrigue, where even his closest allies could be hiding dangerous secrets. His task was no longer just about surviving the trials. Now he was in the middle of a power struggle that could decide the fate of the alliance. He had barely recovered from the last challenge when Halira had laid out the next steps. He needed to find the people who were secretly sabotaging the alliance, working against both her and humanity's future. But who could he trust? Jack's thoughts were interrupted when he reached a small, dimly lit chamber at the edge of the palace. The door opened, and Halira stepped inside, her face unreadable as usual. But today there was something different in her eyes, a flicker of uncertainty. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said, her voice low. "But I need your help." Jack raised an eyebrow. "I thought I already agreed to help. What's going on now?" Halira moved closer, her steps careful. "There's a group within the palace who believes I'm weak, that I'm unable to protect Velthar from external threats. They've been trying to push me out of power for months. And now they know you're here." Jack frowned. "What do you mean?" "They know about the alliance." Halira nodded, her expression hardening. "They've suspected for some time that I'm working with humans. Now that you're here, they'll make their move, and they'll stop at nothing to ensure you fail." Jack was beginning to understand the stakes. This wasn't just a test of his physical and mental abilities anymore. It was a matter of life and death. He had no choice but to play the game carefully, just like Halira. But he wasn't alone in this. She was offering him something, and he needed to figure out how to use it to his advantage. "Who are these people?" Jack asked. Halira hesitated, then lowered her voice even further. "They're high-ranking members of the council, influential leaders who believe in the old ways. They think Velthar should stay isolated, that we shouldn't rely on any outside power, especially not humans. They'll do anything to destroy our chances for peace." Jack nodded slowly, piecing together the situation. It wasn't just about a few rogue soldiers anymore. The political elite was involved. This was far more complicated than he'd imagined. "And how do you expect me to help?" Jack asked. "I can't exactly march into the council chambers and demand they give up their power." Halira looked at him sharply. "No, you'll have to be more subtle than that. We need to find a way to expose them, make them reveal their true intentions without them knowing they've been caught. She paused, as if considering something important. I have an ally, someone who can help us get information. But they're dangerous. You'll need to trust me. Jack's instincts kicked in. Trust. Alira hadn't exactly been open with him before, and now she was asking him to trust someone else, someone unknown, in a situation that was already a minefield of political danger. He wasn't sure if he was ready to dive even deeper into this tangled web, but there was no turning back. I don't have much choice, do I? Jack said, the weight of the situation pressing on him. Alira gave him a slight, knowing smile. No, you don't. She turned and led him down another corridor, this one even darker than the last. The tension between them hung thick in the air, and Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go wrong. But for now, he had no choice but to follow her lead. As they reached a small secret door at the end of the corridor, Alira turned to him. This is where the real work begins, she said, her voice steady, but filled with an undercurrent of something else. Fear, hope. The door opened, and Jack followed her inside, ready for whatever came next. He had to navigate this game carefully, and he could feel that with every step he took, the stakes were rising higher. But one thing was certain. He couldn't do this alone. The door closed softly behind Jack, and he found himself in a small, dimly lit room. The air was thick with tension as Alira led him deeper into the palace's secretive corridors. Jack could feel the weight of her words from earlier hanging over him. They were not just fighting for an alliance anymore. They were fighting for their lives. Alira stopped in front of a large wooden door, ancient carvings decorating its surface. She glanced at Jack, her face serious. Inside, she said, pushing the door open just a crack. Jack stepped forward, his senses on high alert. This was a dangerous game they were playing. One wrong move, and everything could fall apart. Alira's ally might be the key to uncovering the shadowy figures who were sabotaging the alliance. But Jack had learned the hard way that not everyone who claimed to be an ally could be trusted. The room beyond was quiet, filled with the soft hum of strange technology that Jack hadn't seen before. A few low tables were scattered with holographic maps and data tablets. At the far end of the room, a tall figure stood facing away from them. The figure was hooded, their features hidden in the shadows. Alira spoke first, her voice steady. This is my ally. I trust them. The figure turned, and Jack felt his breath catch in his throat. The person standing before him was human, a woman with dark hair tied back tightly. Her eyes were sharp, and she gave him a quick, appraising glance. You must be Jack, she said in a low, calm voice. Alira has told me a lot about you. Jack blinked in surprise. He had expected some alien, some mysterious figure with secrets of their own. But this was a human. Someone who looked like she had been living among the Veltherans for far too long. I didn't expect a human ally, Jack said, his voice betraying his confusion. The woman smiled faintly, her expression guarded. I suppose you wouldn't have. But I've been here for years. I've been working on your behalf, helping from the shadows. Jack's eyes widened. You've been working with the Veltherans all this time. She nodded. Yes, but not in the way you might think. I've been gathering information, monitoring the factions who want to keep this alliance from ever happening. But I don't have much power. It's a dangerous game, and I've had to stay in the background. Jack felt a mix of emotions, relief that there was someone on their side, but also confusion and suspicion. Why hadn't Alira mentioned her earlier? Why keep her hidden? What's your name? Jack asked, trying to gauge the situation. Serena, she replied. I've been helping Alira in ways she can't fully explain. There's more going on here than just political infighting. Some of these factions are backed by larger forces, forces that don't want peace between our worlds. Jack's mind raced. Who are they? And why are they against us? Serena gave him a long, hard look before speaking again. There are elements within Velfar who fear humanity's rise. They believe that allowing you to join us will bring about chaos, that your kind will disrupt the balance of power across the galaxy. They don't understand us like Alira does. They think your species is a threat. Jack clenched his fists. This was bigger than he'd thought. These factions weren't just about politics. They were about survival. They saw humanity's potential as a danger, something they could not control. "And what can we do?" Jack asked, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "How do we stop them?" Serena's gaze flickered to Alira, who had remained silent for the moment. Alira nodded slightly, signaling that Jack was ready to know more. "First, we need to uncover their leaders," Serena said. "We have information on their movements, their plans, but we can't take them down without evidence. We need to expose them publicly, make their actions known to everyone." Alira stepped forward. "Jack, this isn't going to be easy. These factions are well organized, and they've been operating in the shadows for years. We'll need your help to track them down." Jack took a deep breath. He had been thrown into a whirlwind of secrets, lies, and power struggles, but there was no backing down now. The alliance wasn't just about diplomacy. It was about surviving the forces that sought to tear them apart. "I'm in," Jack said, his voice firm. "Let's expose them." Serena gave him a small, approving smile. "We'll need to move quickly. Time is running out." As the three of them huddled around the table, plotting their next move, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Somewhere, someone knew what they were planning, and if they didn't move carefully, their enemy might be one step ahead. The dim light of the holographic maps flickered across the room as Jack, Alira, and Serena gathered around the table. The tension in the air was palpable. Time was running out, and every move they made had to be calculated carefully. They were no longer just fighting for an alliance. They were fighting for their survival. Serena tapped a few keys on the console in front of her, bringing up a series of names and locations. "These are the key players in the opposition," she said, her finger pointing to a list of figures on the screen. "They've been behind the sabotage, the attempts to undermine the peace talks. But there's more." Alira leaned in, her sharp eyes scanning the names. "Who are they?" Serena's gaze darkened. High-ranking officials, military leaders, even members of the council. They believe that Velfar should remain isolated from the rest of the galaxy. They fear that humanity's presence will disrupt the balance of power. Jack clenched his jaw, trying to push back the rising frustration. "So they want to start a war just to keep things the way they were. That's insane." Alira's expression remained calm, though there was a flicker of concern in her eyes. "It's not just about keeping things the same. It's about control. They don't want to lose their power, and humanity's influence threatens that." Jack looked at the list of names. Some of them were familiar. Leaders he'd heard of in the news, others were strangers. "How do we get to them? They're too powerful. We can't just walk in and arrest them." Serena nodded. "That's why we need to be clever. These people operate in the shadows. They've been careful, using intermediaries to hide their involvement. We need to expose them without them knowing they've been discovered." Alira stood up, pacing slowly around the room. "We need to find their weakness, something they can't hide. If we can get hard evidence of their actions, the public will turn against them." Jack's mind began to race. This was bigger than anything he had expected. They weren't just fighting the threat of war. They were fighting a war for control of Velfar itself. "So what's the plan?" Jack asked. "How do we expose them without getting caught?" Serena glanced at Alira, then turned back to Jack. "There's a gala coming up. It's a high-profile event. Lots of important people will be there. It's the perfect place to get information." Alira raised an eyebrow. "A gala? We can't just waltz into a social event and expect to find secrets." Serena gave a small smile. "Not exactly. But there's someone there who can help us. Someone who's been working against these factions from the inside. We just need to get close to them." Jack frowned. "And you think we'll be able to gather the evidence we need at a gala?" Serena's eyes hardened. It's risky, but it's the only way. We'll have to blend in, gather what we can, and leave before anyone realizes what we're doing. Elira crossed her arms. I don't like it. It's too dangerous. If we're caught. We won't be caught, Serena interrupted. We can do this if we work together. Jack didn't like the sound of it, but he knew there was no other choice. Time was running out, and the factions wouldn't wait for them to come up with a perfect plan. They had to take risks. I'm in, Jack said, his voice steady. But we need to move fast. The longer we wait, the harder it will be to stop them. Serena nodded, her eyes calculating. We'll start planning immediately. We'll need to gather disguises, find a way to get in unnoticed. It won't be easy. Elira stepped forward, her expression resolute. I'll do whatever it takes to protect Velfar. But we need to be smart. If we fail, it could be the end of everything. Jack could feel the weight of her words. The stakes were higher than ever. They were about to enter the lion's den, and one wrong move could cost them everything. But there was no turning back now. As they began to plan their infiltration of the gala, Jack knew that this mission would test them all. They were up against powerful enemies, and their every step had to be calculated carefully. In this dangerous game, there could be no mistakes. The night of the gala arrived faster than Jack expected. The grand event was held in the heart of Velfar's capital city, a place filled with towering structures of glass and stone that shimmered under the stars. Jack stood outside the palace, dressed in a sharp, dark suit provided by Elira's people, trying to calm the nerves that had built up in his chest. This was it, the most dangerous part of their plan. The gala would be their opportunity to gather the evidence they needed to expose the factions working against the Alliance. But the risk was immense. Elira had given him a simple yet elegant disguise. She was dressed in a flowing, silver gown that shimmered as she walked beside him. Serena was with them too, wearing a black dress that clung to her frame, a perfect blend of elegance and mystery. They looked like just another group of elite guests, blending seamlessly with the other attendees. As they approached the entrance, a wave of rich, intoxicating aromas filled the air. Music floated from within, and the sound of laughter and conversation spilled out into the courtyard. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a lion's den. Every face here could belong to an enemy, but they had no choice. They had to play their part. The grand hall opened up before them as they passed through the massive archway. The ballroom was magnificent, decorated with intricate crystal chandeliers and golden pillars. Hundreds of guests moved through the room, some in heated conversations, others laughing over drinks. Jack's eyes scanned the crowd, looking for any sign of the key figures Serena had mentioned. He had to find them, without drawing attention to himself. Elira leaned toward him, her voice barely a whisper. Stay calm. We need to find a way to get close to one of them without being noticed. Let me handle the introductions. Jack nodded. He could feel the weight of the plan pressing down on him. He had no experience with high society events like this, but his instincts told him that the real danger was not in the room itself, but in the shadows, where the real players were hidden. As they moved deeper into the hall, Elira subtly guided them through the crowd. She seemed to know where every person in the room was, her movements graceful but purposeful. Jack's focus remained sharp. He had a job to do, and nothing could distract him now. Then suddenly, Elira stopped. She pointed toward a group of individuals standing by a tall golden statue. There were 3 of them, all deep in conversation. One of them was a familiar face, Lord Talos, a powerful military leader who had been known to speak out against the alliance with humanity. His presence here confirmed that the factions opposing peace were actively involved. Serena caught Jack's eye. This is it. We get close, learn what we can, and get out without being noticed. Jack took a deep breath and nodded. The plan had always been risky, but now they were so close. They couldn't afford to hesitate. Elira led them toward Lord Talos and his companions, her poise unwavering. She stepped forward first, offering a polite bow. "Lord Talos, it's an honor to see you again," she said smoothly, her voice warm but controlled. Talos turned, his eyes narrowing slightly as he looked at Elira. "Princess Elira," he said with a forced smile. "It's been a long time." Jack stood slightly behind Elira, keeping his presence as neutral as possible. He had to be careful. Talos had a reputation for being suspicious, and one wrong move could ruin everything. Elira's charm worked like magic as she spoke with Talos, keeping the conversation casual while Jack focused on observing the others in the group. He couldn't shake the feeling that one of them knew more than they were letting on. He studied their faces carefully, watching for any sign of weakness, any indication that they were hiding something. Then, in the midst of the conversation, Jack caught a glance from one of Talos's companions. Their eyes met, and for a split second, Jack saw something he hadn't expected: recognition. The man's face flickered, just for an instant, before he quickly averted his gaze. Jack's heart raced. Had they been spotted? He tried to keep his composure, but the feeling of being watched lingered. The entire evening had been carefully planned. But Jack knew now that nothing was as simple as it seemed. There was more happening in the shadows than they could see. As Elira continued to talk to Talos, Jack's mind raced. They had to finish what they had started and get out before their presence became too obvious. The night was far from over, and the real challenge was just beginning. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Jack's heart was pounding in his chest, each beat loud enough to drown out the music that echoed from the grand ballroom. He had barely taken his eyes off Lord Talos and his companions, trying to act natural while Elira carried on the conversation. But something was off. He could feel it in the air. The moment when their eyes had locked, when Talos's companion had recognized him, had sent a chill down his spine. Jack wasn't sure what it meant, but one thing was clear. They were walking a fine line. If they weren't careful, everything could unravel in an instant. Elira's voice broke through his thoughts, her tone still polite, though a little more clipped. "Lord Talos, I'm sure we both want the same thing, a strong, united Velfar. But some of your methods are troubling." Talos gave a small, amused chuckle. "Princess Elira, always so idealistic. But I suppose that's what makes you charming." He leaned forward slightly. "I trust you don't truly believe that bringing in humanity is the right choice. They are more of a threat than you realize." Jack fought to keep his expression neutral, his hands tightening at his sides. He wanted to speak, to say something, but Elira's hand gave a slight, warning touch on his arm. He took a deep breath and focused on the conversation. They needed information, not confrontation. Serena, who had been keeping a careful distance, was still scanning the room. Her sharp eyes caught every movement, every subtle shift in the crowd. It was clear she was on edge. Every time she glanced toward the door or toward the exits, it sent a wave of unease through Jack. Something was about to happen. Then it came, an almost imperceptible nod from one of Talos's companions, a man with a dark beard and calculating eyes. The moment they made eye contact, Jack's instincts screamed. Something was wrong. The recognition wasn't an accident. They had known he was there from the start. "Forgive me, Lord Talos," Elira said smoothly, her voice turning colder. "But I don't believe we can agree on that matter. Humanity will prove to be an asset, not a threat." Elira stepped back just as the man with the dark beard subtly moved his hand to his side, as if ready to draw a weapon. Jack's pulse quickened. The last thing he needed was for everything to fall apart now. Before he could react, Serena was already stepping forward, blocking the man's path with one swift motion. Her voice was icy. "I think it's time you all understood that your little game is over." The man froze, his eyes flicking toward the other two. Lord Talos's calm mask dropped for a moment, replaced by a sharp look of suspicion. Jack knew they had been made. The clock was ticking now, and they had no choice but to act. Elira stepped back even further, her posture tense. "Serena, what's going on?" "It's a trap," Serena said, her voice low but steady. "They've known about us for a while." The gala was just a distraction. Jack barely had time to register her words before chaos erupted. Tala's companion lunged, and the crowd around them seemed to shift in an instant. There were shouts, screams, and the sound of footsteps rushing toward them. They had been surrounded. Lyra acted without hesitation. She drew a concealed blade from under her gown, a smooth, quick motion that caught the attackers off guard. Serena moved alongside her, striking with precision, and Jack followed suit, trying to protect Lyra as best as he could. But as they fought back, Jack's mind raced. How had they been found out? Who had betrayed them? The answer came moments later, in a cold whisper from behind them. "Did you really think you could trust anyone?" Jack whipped around, his heart sinking as he saw the man with the dark beard, who had been part of their group, standing with a smug expression. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He was the traitor. "You were never going to get out of here alive," the man said with a grin, his eyes cold and calculating. "We've known about your plan all along." Jack's breath caught in his throat. You were with us." The man's smile widened. "I've been leading you right into our trap. The peace talks were never the goal. The goal was always to end you." As the man drew his weapon, Jack knew they had no time left. It was a fight to the death now. "Get ready," Serena said, her voice filled with grim determination. "We're not finished yet." With the traitor in their midst, the stakes had never been higher. The battle wasn't just about exposing the opposition anymore. It was about survival. And Jack wasn't about to go down without a fight.